Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Chalia with PHCA. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. A few quick updates to share before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website. The webinar has been approved for one continuing education credit for all PHCA members in attendance. For those who provided a NAB number, credits will be uploaded within the next 2 to 3 weeks. As we begin today, all attendees should be in listen-only mode. Please feel free to submit your questions utilizing the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to answer as many of those questions as possible at the end of today's presentation. And now we'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Kim. So my name is Laura Williams, and I've been an occupational therapist for about 27 years, mainly working with seniors in a wide variety of settings, but mostly long-term care, assisted living, and home care. I had not heard of Center for Vulnerable Voters till about 2 years ago when an activity director walked into our therapy gym and asked us a voting-related question. So, and that threw us all for a loop, and that sent me on the journey to find out more information about voting, residential voting, and that led me to the Center for Vulnerable Voters. And I joined them probably about 18 months ago. So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization, and we advocate for all types of vulnerable voters. There's just a little bit of information there. So I'm just going to dive right in. Vulnerable voters. Who are vulnerable voters? Those are our folks that served in the military, especially those overseas and their families, folks that are homeless, folks that have disabilities, our seniors that are residing, are aging in place, residing in their homes, and then obviously our residents in residential communities, which is where I'm going to focus on today. So we have 5 objectives at the Center for Vulnerable Voters. We enable vulnerable voter constituencies to protect their vote and exercise their civic right to participate in America's election process. We train and educate citizens to actively participate in protecting both the voter and their vote. We ensure all types of election officials, poll watchers, poll observers, poll workers understand how to protect the integrity of all votes. We train and educate residential facility and skilled nursing staff in how to protect the voting rights of their most vulnerable residents. And then we educate the general public on the legal ramifications of vote fraud against these vulnerable citizens. And again, today I'm just going to be focusing on residential constituencies. So, nursing homes, long-term care, special need group homes, personal care homes, the VA homes, assisted living, and your continuing care retirement communities. As I go through the presentation, I think it's important to have these basic voting rights in the back of our mind to help us best honor and support our residents. So we've developed the Senior Citizen Bill of Rights. So the first one is the right to vote or not vote. The choice is the residents and the residents alone. The second one is the right to refuse assistance from unknown person or persons you do not want help from. And that would include family members and election officials. The resident has a right to privacy. No one has the right to ask them about their personal and private voting preferences or even to make a voting suggestion. Voting is strictly confidential. The resident has a right to redress. So if they believe that their rights have been violated, they can report this to their local election authorities. They can contact us and we can help walk them through that process. And the last one is the right to request candidates visit their residence. We believe it's important for residents to meet their representatives and be able to ask them questions and have those concerns. They need to have an avenue to voice their concerns. So basically, they have a right to participate as little or as much as they want to in the process. And this is just the CMS memo regarding voting. And it basically says that the resident has a right to exercise their right to vote and that the facility needs to support that right. So I think we're probably all aware that residential communities are more susceptible to being taken advantage of in a variety of areas. When I worked in home care, I had to intervene with financial abuse from family members, had to get the ombudsman involved. I've had to step in with durable medical equipment companies, trying to sell a product to my patients that are either was either unsafe or they simply couldn't use. So voting is no different. These residents are just simply more susceptible to being taken advantage of. I get a lot of questions requesting definitions of terms. So I'm going to go over 4 key terms that I think it's important to us to just have a basic understanding of before we can move forward and learn how we can advocate for the residents we serve. So the first one is vote suppression. And that is a technique or strategy used to influence the outcome of an election by discouraging or preventing specific groups of people from voting. The second one is vote coercion or theft. And that's the use of intimidation or fear of reprisal to secure a vote for a specific candidate. So in some cases, the perpetrator may simply fill out the ballot without the resident's authorization. I'm going to share an example of this because we do have a hotline that residents, family members, staff can call and either ask questions or report a concern. So we had a family member call and report that her father was receiving physical therapy services. And the physical therapist had told her father that anybody that votes for candidate X deserves to have their medication taken away from them. So we believe that's a form of intimidation, a form of vote coercion. The third one is ballot harvesting. And that's the non-secure method of collecting absentee or mail-in ballots during an election with the intent of dropping them off at the election office or the polling place. And it's legal in some states and it's illegal in other states. In Pennsylvania, and this is according to our legal guide. So according to guidance from the Department of Pennsylvania State, each resident in a long-term care facility, and this also applies to all types of residential communities. So as I go through the presentation, the legal counsel will use the term nursing home, but it applies to assisted living, memory care, personal care homes. So it applies to all types of residential communities. So according to guidance from the Pennsylvania Department of State, each resident in a long-term care facility who is unable to return their own voted ballot due to a disability must designate a different agent. However, a couple sharing a room or an apartment within a facility may be considered members of the same household and therefore entitled to use the same designated agent. So in Pennsylvania, this ballot harvesting is legal. The fourth one is ballot trafficking, and that's the illegal collection or submission of election ballots. So an example of this was I recently moved and I had to submit a change of address. So I went to the post office and the postmaster told me there's a new form, a new process to submit a change of address. And the new process is depending on the date that you submit it and the date that you request your mail to be forwarded to the new address, you have 20 days to either confirm in person or via security code via email, confirm that you are the one that requested this change of address. And I asked him why was this new process? And he said over the past several years, there's been an investigation with the United States Post Office has investigated complaints from citizens, and they had discovered that people with ill intent were submitting change of addresses on unsuspecting people, requesting a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot, filling out that ballot, returning it, and then canceling the change of address. So the unsuspecting person, the victim, did not have any idea that this had happened until they went to vote on election day. So that is a form of ballot trafficking. So there are steps that residential communities can take to protect their residents, their staff, and their facility. We believe it's important to review federal and state laws to identify any facility vulnerabilities that you may have, identify the residents' needs, implement or update policies and procedures regarding residential voting, and then monitor those policies and procedures. And we believe that implementing the policies and procedures are important regardless of the residents' methods of voting. So I'm going to dive into some state and federal laws. I had received a lot of legal questions from directors over the past year. So we reached out to our legal counsel and they reviewed the Pennsylvania voting assistance laws and they've developed a guide for residential directors. So I've pulled some pieces out of this guide to share with you today. And feel free to email me. I can more than happy to share this guide with anybody who wants it. So I can email you a copy or I can mail a hard copy to you. Just shoot me an email and let me know you want this Pennsylvania voting assistance legal guide. So regarding mail-in and absentee voting, Pennsylvania has two types of mail-in voting. They have mail-in ballots, which can be requested by any registered Pennsylvania voter. And they have absentee ballots, which can only be requested by voters who belong to a specific category. So what happened with that is I believe it was right around 2019, Pennsylvania passed a law allowing all registered Pennsylvania voters to be able to vote by mail. Prior to that, they had an absentee ballot law where only voters that had specific categories, so maybe they were over 65 or they were disabled, could request an absentee ballot. So unfortunately, they didn't correct that law, and so now that there's two forms of mail-in voting. Most people are obviously going to use the mail-in ballots because that's open to everybody. So can nursing staff assist their residents with absentee voting? No. The Pennsylvania Code does not have a blanket mail-in voting assistance provision that would be applicable to all nursing home residents. Guidance published by the Pennsylvania Department of State in August 2022 notes that, in general, voters must return their own mail-in or absentee ballot. So can nursing staff assist their residents with absentee voting? There is an exception for voters with a disability as defined by the Americans with Disability Act. However, this exception does not apply to a voter who does not have a qualifying disability, nor does it apply to a qualified disabled voter who failed to designate an agent in writing. The only exception pertains to an elector or a voter who is unable to sign the declaration because of an illness or physical disability. So can nursing home staff assist disabled residents with absentee voting? So any voter who requires assistance to vote by reason of blindness, disability, or inability to read or write may be given assistance by a person of the voter's choice, other than the voter's employer or agent of that employer or officer or agent of the voters' union. So we're still on, can nursing home staff assist disabled residents with absentee voting? So federal law defines a qualified disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So Pennsylvania law, they add, refers specifically to voters who are unable to sign the mail-in ballot declaration because of an illness or physical disability, and requires a disabled voter seeking assistance completing their mail-in ballot declaration to declare that I am unable to sign my declaration for voting my mail-in ballot without assistance because I am unable to write by reason of my illness or my physical disability. So it does not matter whether the voter has requested a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot. Any disabilities that are unrelated to a voter's ability to read or mark their ballot do not qualify for assistance. It's important to note that even under this federal exception for assisting disabled voters, the voter must still have the ability to make an effective request for assistance. So it's all resident-led. So we're still talking about, can nursing home staff assist disabled residents with absentee voting? So Pennsylvania law specifically requires that a disabled voter shall be excused from signing their own mail-in ballot upon making a declaration concerning their need for assistance due to their inability to read or write. If the voter is unable to make such a declaration or offer instructions to the person assisting them concerning their desired vote choice, then assistance cannot be rendered. So if nursing home staff are not allowed to assist residents, then who can? So Pennsylvania law does not make a general provision for voting assistance for voters who are not disabled, as described above. So we're still on, if nursing home staff are not allowed to assist residents, then who can? So under both federal and state law, a disabled voter is entitled to request the assistance of any individual, provided that person rendering the assistance is not the elector's employer or agent of the employer or an officer of the union or agent of the elector's union. So nursing home staff may lawfully assist disabled voters in completing their ballots if an effective request for assistance has been made. So any person who assists a disabled voter in casting their absentee ballot shall complete, date, and sign the declaration that the person has caused the elector's ballot to be marked in accordance with such elector's desires and instructions. And so again, if the voter is unable to indicate their desires or instruct their assister in marking their ballot, then assistance cannot be rendered. So Pennsylvania is kind of a little unique because they outline what they consider unlawful assistance in voting. So I'm going to go over some, and these apply to both the voter and the person assisting them. So I'm going to share a few of those. So unlawful assistance in voting. Without having made the disability declaration under oath or affirmation, or when the disability which the voter declared before any registration commission no longer exists, or to permits another to mark his ballot. So basically, they've had a disability, but it no longer exists, and they're still allowing somebody else to help them, or they've declared have not declared a disability. So we're still under unlawful assistance in voting. So to state falsely to an election officer that because of illiteracy, the voter is unable to read the names on the ballot or ballot labels, or by the reason of physical disability, he cannot see or mark the ballot without assistance. And another unlawful assistance in voting is to state as his reason for requiring assistance a disability from which the voter does not suffer. Another one is for a person giving assistance to attempt to influence the vote of the elector whom he is assisting, or who shall mark a ballot in any other way than that was requested by the voter whom he is assisting, or who shall disclose to anyone the contents of any ballot which has been marked with his assistance. So how should voted absentee ballots be returned? And we talked about this a little earlier. So voted mail-in ballots can be returned to the appropriate county board of elections in one of two ways: returned by the voter by mail or delivered in person to the county board of elections. And a Pennsylvania voter who has a disability is defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act that prevents them from returning their vote by mail or absentee ballot can designate an agent to assist them. And a person designated as the agent can only perform that service for a single voter unless they're from the same household. So according to guidance from the Department of State, each resident in a long-term care facility or residential community who is unable to return their own vote by mail ballot due to a disability must designate a different agent. However, a couple sharing a room or apartment within a community may be considered members of the same household and are entitled to use the same agent. They do offer an alternative to designate an agent to return vote by mail ballots. A facility may arrange for residents to deliver their own ballots to the mailbox, the county elections office, or another drop-off location designated by your local county board of elections. So I'm going to jump into vulnerabilities and identifying some vulnerabilities. So some questions that directors can ask themselves are, am I aware of federal and state voting laws? Do I conduct yearly staff training regarding voting? Are there outside organizations coming into the facility to assist my residents with voting? We actually recommend that no outside facilities come in to assist residents with voting. Is there unmonitored assistance with ballot requests and submissions? Am I aware of where my resident's ballot is from the time it enters my building till the time it is safely at the election authority? Are there outside groups asking my staff to fill out ballots for residents or collect ballots? As I mentioned earlier, we have a hotline, and we had several staff members call and report that they were approached outside their community and offered financial compensation to either ballot harvest, so collect residents' ballots, or fill out ballots for residents. So we want to make sure staff are aware that this is happening and that it is not okay. Do I know which residents are designated non-compos mentis, and do I have an extra layer of protection in place for those residents? So residents who cannot express they wish to vote in the election and/or express their preferred candidate should not have a ballot application filled out for them or a ballot marked for them. So I get a lot of questions on ID, voter ID. So per the Pennsylvania State Board of Elections, you only need to provide ID if it's your first time voting at a new polling place. And if so, you must bring an approved form of identification. And here is their approved forms of identification. If you do not have a photo ID, you can use an approved non-photo ID that includes your name and address. And they do have a list of these here. So confirmation or voter registration card issued by your county elections, a non-photo ID by the Commonwealth or federal government, firearm permit, and then some current utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, or a government check. We recommend that if you have any questions or if there's any unusual circumstances with your residents, just reach out to your local election authorities. So I'm going to jump to methods of voting. So this will help you with identifying your residents' needs. Are some residents, do they want to go to in-person voting? Are they non-mobile and they need to do absentee or mail-in ballot? So the general methods of voting, so the most common methods of voting are in-person voting on election day, in-person early voting, and then absentee voting by mail or mail-in ballot. There are additional methods of voting in Pennsylvania. There's remote accessible ballots. So this would be for a resident who maybe has a screen reader or another accessible device in their home where they can have a ballot emailed to them or mailed to them. So this would be something that the resident already has in their home, a screen reader or another accessible device. And this would allow them to be able to vote in private. There's also something called alternative ballots. So if a polling place is not accessible, they can request a mail-in ballot. Now, per federal law, the polling places need to be accessible. Another thing to be aware of, let's say there's emergency alternative ballot. So let's say your resident is in the hospital. They can request a ballot, an emergency ballot where the election authorities would actually bring a ballot to them in the hospital and they would be able to vote. So again, that's something, if something like that happens, reach out to your local election authorities and ask for their assistance. So in-person early voting or in-person early absentee voting and in-person on election day, they must be accessible per federal and state laws. So there must be handicap accessible, parking, and in the polling place. There must be room in the polling place for a wheelchair and a walker to maneuver around. There must be a ramp for them to access, to be able to get into the polling place. If they're 75 years or older or disabled, they may move to the front of the line. There's curbside voting, and that's really nice. You can load the residents in your transport van or your transport vehicle, and you want to arrange this ahead of time. You can pull into the polling place parking lot at a prearranged time and the election authorities will come out to the resident. So they don't need to get out of their vehicle. And they need to offer assistive devices such as large ballot viewers, audio ballots. All that should be available to the residents. So some safeguards of in-person early and in-person on election day voting is it ensures the privacy of their vote. So if we go back to the residential Bill of Rights, one of the things is privacy of the vote. So this helps maintain and support that right. There's trained election authorities available to accurately answer the residents' questions. Election authorities from both political parties are there to ensure checks and balances. This is a great way to ensure the proper chain of custody of their marked ballot. And it's a layer of protection for staff in the facilities at any time that you can separate yourself from the process and turn the election process over to the election authorities. It's just a great layer of protection for the staff in the facilities. So, and this is discussing a little bit more about those absentee ballots and the mail-in ballots. So this is from our legal team. So for decades, Pennsylvania only allowed voters to request absentee ballots for specific enumerated reasons that prevented them from voting in person. And in 2019, Pennsylvania enacted a new law creating the mail-in voting category, which is a form of mail voting available to all registered voters without excuse. So that old law was not repealed. But really there's two ways to legally vote by mail in Pennsylvania, but most people are going to go with the standard mail-in voting. So we recommend you work closely with your local board of elections for all voter education and registration information. We recommend that you obtain all election materials, the application forms from your local board of elections. Contact them for any voting related questions. They are there to help out. And then ask for assistance. If you have any unusual circumstances with your residents, reach out to them. They're there to help you. So I'm going to switch to policy and procedure implementation. So we reviewed a few federal and state laws, some ideas for identifying any facility vulnerabilities that you may or may not have. Identify the residents' needs. So can they go to the polling place? Do they need to have a mail-in ballot? So we're going to go into implementing or updating policies and procedures. So some ideas for policies and procedures that we recommend are staff education and training on voting laws and penalties for violating those laws. We believe it's important to know and enforce ballot assistance laws. Enacting policies to protect the residents and staff from outside organizations. We believe it's important to create systems and to monitor those systems to protect the chain of custody of ballots while they're in your facility. Teaching staff it is not okay to tell a resident who to vote for, that it's actually illegal. Discuss with staff how to protect residents from ballot traffickers. And again, safeguarding those residents who are designated non-compos mentis. So residents who cannot respond to their name should not be given a ballot, and residents who cannot either express that they wish to vote in the election or cannot indicate their preferred choice on the ballot should not have a ballot marked for them. We believe it's important to keep families informed. I had a director come up to me and tell me a story that they had election authorities come in to assist with filling out an application for a mail-in ballot. And that facility is in a state where immediate family members can request a ballot for a voter. So the election authorities came in, assisted a resident with filling out a ballot application. The family then requested a ballot for their loved one, only to be told that a ballot had already been requested in their loved one's name. So it was a little touch and go there for an hour or so. He said the family had called the authorities had got a hold of the facility. It all worked out in the end, but he now keeps family informed of all voting related activities. So keeping families informed of any type of voting education that's happening at the facility, any visits from election officials, letting them know the dates and times of trips to polling places, informing them of any policies and procedures that the facility hasn't implemented. And then we think it's also important to educate family on tips to protect their loved ones. And one of those tips is educating the family, but also the residents and the staff on how to tell the difference between official election mail and political mail. So all official election mail will have this logo on the envelope. It is legal in some states for third-party organizations to send out voter registration forms or ballot application forms with the intent of that information making it back to the election office. We recommend utilizing only forms and applications and information from your local election authority, and to always watch for this official election mail logo on your envelopes. I had a couple of directors come up to me with a question on how they should handle family members who are voting for their loved ones. So not assisting them, they're actually voting for their loved ones. So no one can vote for another person, even if you are a legal guardian, if you are a medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, you cannot vote for another person. The directors requested some type of gentle handout that they could hand out to all the family members in an effort to try and prevent that from happening in their community. So we developed this assisting loved one guide, and you can, again, this is information you can email me. I will be happy to mail you hard copies, email you copies, and you can take all this information and share it. So this just goes over what we mentioned before, that a loved one who cannot express their wish to vote in elections should not have a mail-in ballot or absentee ballot application filled out for them. And a loved one who cannot either express they wish to vote in the election or cannot indicate their preferred choice on the ballot should not have a ballot marked for them. And then we encourage family members to look at the state laws, as they are different and they change frequently. And then family members should seek their organization's legal counsel with detailed questions. So that's something that feel free to share out with family members. We encourage preventing that. So if this is a little bit more widespread than I thought, I've had several directors ask me how to handle this, which is again, it's a horrible situation for residential directors to be in, but do your best to try and prevent it. I've spoken to ombudsmen in different states. They've mentioned they would be happy to intervene and try and prevent that from happening. However, we do recommend that you treat this as you would any other suspected illegal activity. So all suspected illegal activities involving family members should be referred to your facility's legal counsel, the local authorities, and your residents' ombudsman. Again, we recommend education and prevention first and foremost. But if you suspect an illegal activity, treat it as you would any other illegal activity. So how can I best support my residents? We recommend reviewing that Senior Bill of Rights and using that as your guide. Identifying any facility vulnerabilities you may or may not have, and then implementing and monitoring policies and procedures to protect both the staff, the residents, and the facility. Be sure to keep those family and friends informed of what's going on. And then stay in contact with your local election authorities and request assistance for any voting related activity. Keep their name and number on speed dial. I reached out to directors and asked them to share some examples of policies and procedures that they have implemented. So I'm going to read off some of their procedures. Now, note that this is nationwide, so this isn't just specific to Pennsylvania. So the first one, we document name, address, phone, and email of all individuals that come into the community for any voting related discussions. Staff chart all interactions and discussions related to the voting process, and there is always 2 staff present with 1 being a director. We inform families of all aspects of the voting process when we transport the residents to the polls and when election authorities will be coming to our community. All mobile residents are transported to the early voting polling center. The residents that have vote by mail ballots to mail are transported to the local drop box outside the election authority's office, and the residents place their ballot in the drop box. If a resident is unable to get out of the van driver places their ballot in the drop box in front of the resident. All vote by mail ballots are locked and stored in the director's office till the election authorities arrive or until the resident is ready to complete their ballot independently. We only allow election authorities to conduct voting. It is against the rules for staff to discuss politics with residents, and they are not allowed to wear political clothing. We conduct yearly staff training with additional training 2 months before presidential elections. And we work with election authorities to be notified of who in the facility is receiving a mail-in ballot and when to expect it. And we document the chain of custody while that ballot is in our building. So those are just a few ideas that other residential directors have implemented. And these are some important dates for Pennsylvania. So the voter registration deadline is October 21st. So, make note of that for residents that have maybe recently moved into your community, that they need to get their voter registration updated. Now, keep in mind, if you have a voter or a resident that wants to vote that moved in after October 21st, just pick up the phone and call the election authorities and ask them what the process is for that, because they will still be able to vote. It's a certain time frame where they may have to vote from their old address or they can vote from their current address. So just pick up the phone and call the election authorities and explain that situation to them and ask them to help make that happen for the resident. So the last day to request a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot is October 29th, and of course, election day is November 5th. So the Pennsylvania election authorities, the state, recommends that you contact your local election authorities for specific information regarding early in-person voting. And there's a link there to locate your election officials, your local election officials. And here's some more additional resources on voting and election information. And then please, please be aware that laws change frequently. So always keep in contact with your local election authorities or your legal counsel to ensure that recent changes in the law have not altered your obligations to your residents. And does anyone have any questions or
I am
comments?
looking at the chat and I do not see any questions that have come through yet. As always, if you're more comfortable submitting a question to myself or Laura, please feel free. If you don't have Laura's contact info, you can always send me a message and I can forward that on to Laura. And just looking at the chat, I'm not seeing anything else coming through.
Or if
So
anybody ever has any policies or procedures that they've implemented, please share that. I'm all about sharing information with other directors and across states.
So going once, going twice. All right, we're going to give everyone back 14 minutes of their day this morning, and I hope that you found this information valuable. I know I did, and as always, thanks so much, Laura. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.